Imagine a city so powerful, so legendary, that for over 1,000 years it stood as the jewel of two great empires. A city so desired it was called the City of the World's Desire. That city was Constantinople, and in 1453 it would face its greatest test, against a determined young sultan who would stop at nothing to claim it. Constantinople was not just a city, it was a symbol. Sitting at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, it was the gateway between East and West. Protected by towering walls and surrounded by the sea on three sides, many believed it could never be taken. For centuries, wave after wave of invaders tried and failed. Arabs, Bulgars, Rus, and even Crusaders all tested its defenses. Yet the city endured, defiant and unbroken. But in 1451, a new sultan rose to power in the Ottoman Empire. His name was Mehmed II. Just 19 years old, brilliant, ambitious, and utterly determined. Unlike others before him, Mehmet did not see Constantinople as an untouchable fortress. To him, it was destiny, a city that would become the crown jewel of his empire or the graveyard of his dreams. On the other side of the walls stood the Byzantine Empire, once a mighty force, now reduced to a shadow of its former self. The Emperor Constantine XI was brave and noble, but he had few men, little money, and almost no allies. His empire, once stretching across the Mediterranean, had shrunk to a handful of territories. Constantinople was all that remained, and even that was crumbling. Still, Constantine swore to defend his city to the last breath. Mehmet began preparations in secret. He built a massive fortress, Rumeli Hisari, on the Bosporus, choking off Constantinople's lifeline to the Black Sea. He summoned the greatest engineers of the time, commissioning giant cannons so powerful that their thunder would shake the earth itself. For months, he gathered soldiers, ships, and supplies. An army of more than 80,000 men stood ready to march on Constantinople. The city's defenders? Barely 7,000. And so the stage was set. A legendary city, weak but proud. A young conqueror, bold and unrelenting. In the spring of 1453, the armies of Mehmet II surrounded Constantinople. The greatest siege in medieval history was about to begin. On April 6, 1453, Mehmet II arrived before the walls of Constantinople with his vast army. The ground trembled beneath the weight of soldiers, horses, and cannons. The defenders, peering from the city walls, saw a sea of tents stretching as far as the eye could see. The greatest siege in medieval history had begun. For over 1,000 years, the Theodosian walls had been the pride of Constantinople. 3 layers of massive stone fortifications, towers rising high into the sky, and a wide moat in front. These walls had withstood every attack for centuries. To the Byzantines, they were a shield from God himself. But Mehmet had a weapon unlike any other. Mehmet's engineers had built something terrifying. A cannon so huge it took 60 oxen to pull. Designed by a Hungarian master named Orban, this monster hurled stone balls weighing over half a ton. When it fired, the sound echoed like thunder across land and sea. Entire sections of the walls shook with each blast. Inside the city, fear grew. Only about 7,000 defenders stood against Mehmet's massive host. Greek soldiers, Venetian sailors, and even a few desperate volunteers from across Europe fought side by side. Food supplies dwindled. Citizens prayed in the great Hagia Sophia, candles flickering as voices echoed under its vast dome. But their emperor, Constantine XI, never wavered. Day and night he walked the walls, sword at his side, encouraging his men to fight on. The Ottomans also attacked by sea. Their fleet of more than 100 ships clashed with the smaller but determined Byzantine navy. The defenders had a secret weapon, an iron chain stretched across the Golden Horn, blocking enemy ships from entering. For weeks, the chain held firm, frustrating Mehmed's sailors and keeping the city supplied through its northern harbor. But Mehmed was no ordinary commander. If he couldn't break the chain, he would go around it. In a daring move, he ordered his men to drag ships over land, across wooden planks greased with oil, sliding them like ghosts across the hills and into the Golden Horn, behind the chain. One morning, the defenders awoke to a shocking sight: Ottoman ships inside their harbor. The impossible had become reality. Constantinople was now under attack from all sides, its mighty walls shaking under the cannon fire, its harbor breached, its people exhausted. Yet, still the city stood. But Mehmed had no intention of waiting forever. He was preparing for one final, all-or-nothing assault. By late May, Constantinople was on the brink. Weeks of relentless bombardment had torn gaping cracks in the once impenetrable walls. Food and hope were running out. But still, Emperor Constantine XI refused to surrender. He told his people, "Better to die with honor than live in shame." The defenders prepared for what they knew would be the final battle. On the night of May 28, 1453, Mehmed II made his choice. He would launch a massive, all-or-nothing assault. His soldiers prayed, their chants echoing across the Ottoman camp. Drums pounded like a heartbeat, carrying the promise of victory. In the city, churches filled with desperate prayers. Families clung to each other, knowing that by morning their world might be gone forever. At 1:30 in the morning, the silence shattered. Ottoman cannons roared, filling the night with thunder. Waves of soldiers charged forward. First the irregular troops, then the seasoned warriors, and finally the elite janissaries. The defenders fought back fiercely, raining arrows, stones, and fire from the walls. For hours the battle raged in chaos. Blood soaked the ground. Screams echoed across the city. In the thick of the fighting, Emperor Constantine XI himself fought on the walls. Sword in hand, he refused to flee. Witnesses say he tore off his imperial regalia, declaring he would die as a common soldier of his people. And then he disappeared into the melee, never to be seen again. At last, after hours of brutal combat, the Ottomans broke through a small gate known as the Kerkoporta. Janissaries flooded inside, cutting down defenders and opening the way for thousands more. The proud walls that had stood for 1,000 years were finally breached. As the sun rose on May 29, 1453, Constantinople was collapsing from within. Smoke filled the air. The sound of steel and cries of battle shook the city. The end of an empire was just moments away. On the morning of May 29th, the unthinkable had happened. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the great walls of Constantinople had been breached. Ottoman soldiers poured into the city. The defenders, exhausted and outnumbered, could no longer hold the line. The Byzantine Empire, once the mightiest in the world, was in its final moments. Chaos swept through Constantinople. Soldiers clashed in the narrow streets, civilians fled in terror, and the once proud neighborhoods of the city echoed with screams and fire. For the people, it was the end of a world they had always known. For Mehmed II, it was the dawn of a new era. In the heart of the city, thousands of citizens had gathered in the great Hagia Sophia, the magnificent church that had stood for nearly a millennium. Priests led prayers, voices trembling as the sound of battle drew closer. And then, Ottoman soldiers burst through the doors. The final sanctuary of the Byzantines was silenced.
By midday, victory was complete. Mehmed II entered Constantinople through the gate of St. Romanus. At just 21 years old, the young sultan had achieved what countless armies before him had failed to do. He rode through the ruined streets, finally reaching the Hagia Sophia. Dismounting, he looked up at its great dome and declared, "From this day forward, this city is mine." Mehmed ordered the Hagia Sophia to be converted into a mosque, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the city's story. Constantinople was reborn as Istanbul, the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. For Mehmed, it was the fulfillment of a dream, earning him the title Mehmed the Conqueror. For the Byzantines, it was the end of their empire, an empire that had survived since the days of Rome itself. But the fall of Constantinople was not just the end of one empire. It was a turning point for the entire world. Its shockwaves would reach across continents, reshaping trade, sparking new discoveries, and changing history forever. The fall of Constantinople was more than the end of the Byzantine Empire. It was the end of the Middle Ages. For centuries, the city had been a fortress of Christianity in the East, a bridge between Europe and Asia. Now, it was the heart of a rising Islamic empire. The balance of power in the world had shifted forever. Across Europe, the news struck like thunder. If the mighty walls of Constantinople could fall, then no city was safe. Fear swept through kingdoms, but so did determination. The fall of the city cut off Europe's access to Eastern trade routes. Spices, silk, and treasures, once flowing through Constantinople, were now controlled by the Ottomans. This single event forced Europeans to look for new paths to the east, sparking an age of exploration that would lead to the voyages of Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and beyond. For Mehmed II, the conquest was just the beginning. He transformed Istanbul into a thriving capital, building palaces, mosques, and markets. Under his leadership, the Ottoman Empire grew into one of the most powerful empires in history, spanning 3 continents and lasting for centuries. At only 21 years old, he had earned his place among the greatest conquerors of all time. But for many, Constantinople remains a symbol, a reminder of how even the mightiest empires can fall. 1,000 years of history gone in a single day. And yet the city lives on. Istanbul remains a place where East meets West, where history whispers from every stone, and where the legacy of 1453 still shapes the world we live in today. The conquest of Constantinople was one of the most dramatic turning points in world history. But what if it had ended differently? What if the walls had held once more and the Byzantine Empire had survived? How different do you think our world would look today?